Tonight, we begin with a trade war catastrophe that economic analysts have called unprecedented, possibly the most humiliating policy backfire we've seen in modern American history. Trump's tariff bluff just got called. $150 billion in Canadian retaliation, targeting Republican states with surgical precision. American businesses now begging for relief. What the White House did last week crossed a line that trade experts had warned would trigger devastating consequences. And when that line shattered, Canada did not negotiate. They did not seek compromise. They did not back down. They launched the largest retaliatory trade action in the history of North American commerce. The president who built his brand on winning just got checkmated by America's closest ally. And the economic damage is only beginning. Imagine this scene. It's 8:15 a.m. on Thursday morning. In the Prime Minister's office in Ottawa, Mark Carney sits surrounded by trade ministers and economic advisors reviewing the final retaliation package. The room carries quiet determination. Coffee cups sit untouched. Present in that room, Prime Minister Mark Carney, former Bank of England governor, now leading Canada's response deputy, Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, veteran trade negotiator with deep American contacts, Trade Minister Mary Ng, coordinating the most comprehensive tariff response in Canadian history. These are the people who understand global trade architecture, who know exactly where American economic vulnerabilities lie, who have spent months preparing for this exact moment. Carney is reviewing the final target list, designed to maximize economic pressure, to hit Trump-supporting regions hardest, and to demonstrate that Canada will not be bullied. The ministers listen. They confirm readiness. And then, one by one, they authorize the response. Not proportional measures, not symbolic gestures. A $150 billion counterattack targeting every vulnerable sector of the American economy. And Trump, watching the announcement from the White House, understands that his bluff has been catastrophically called. Think about that. For 6 months now, there had been signals, not public statements, not official warnings, just diplomatic murmurs, that Canada was preparing something unprecedented. Ottawa has been patient, yes, but they have been methodical in their patience. Their preparations have followed a certain inevitability, a calculation, almost a countdown. But what set off alarm bells in Washington this week was that the patience ended completely. Trade analysts who monitor Canadian policy know the indicators, the unusual coordination meetings between provincial premiers, the encrypted communications with European trade partners, the sudden acceleration of alternative supply chain agreements, the quiet stockpiling of retaliatory target research, all of that culminated simultaneously. And whenever Canada stops negotiating while accelerating preparation, it means the response is imminent. The trade relationship that worked for decades, because both sides benefited, because supply chains were integrated, and because neither wanted disruption, has just been fundamentally challenged. American threats became too aggressive. Canadian patience became exhausted. Public opinion demanded strength. When nations conclude that accommodation means weakness while resistance means survival, that's when relationships transform. That's when $150 billion counterattacks get launched. Let me be very specific about what happened Tuesday morning and why trade economists immediately recognized this as a historic escalation based on the announced measures. Canada unveiled a comprehensive retaliation package involving tariffs on American agricultural products, restrictions on energy exports, and targeted duties on manufactured goods, designed to inflict maximum economic pain, to pressure Republican constituencies, and to demonstrate that bullying has consequences. The retaliation required coordination with all 10 provincial governments that typically disagree on trade policy alternative supply agreements with European and Asian partners that took months to negotiate economic modeling that identified the most vulnerable American sectors with precision political unity that transcended traditional party divisions. Prime Minister Carney, who normally demonstrates measured diplomatic language, stated directly that Canada would not be intimidated, that the 35% tariff demand was rejected completely, that proportional response was insufficient, and that Canada would escalate until America returned to fair dealing. When Trump dismissed the retaliation as insignificant, suggesting Canada needed America more than America needed Canada, Carney responded in language deliberately chosen to reach American voters directly. American farmers, manufacturers, and workers will pay the price for this administration's recklessness. We did not seek this conflict, but we will win it. Other Canadian officials supported this assessment in terms that became progressively more aggressive as the day continued. Ontario Premier announced immediate restrictions on American auto parts. Alberta indicated energy export reductions were under consideration. Quebec confirmed targeting of American agricultural imports. British Columbia announced Pacific trade acceleration with Asian partners. Multiple news organizations confirmed this through government sources and trade documentation. Within 3 hours of the announcement, assessments were being distributed to American agricultural associations, to manufacturing lobbies, and to Republican congressional offices. The consensus assessment was stark and unanimous. This retaliation will cost American jobs, reduce American exports, and hurt American farmers in ways that cannot be quickly reversed. One senior trade economist speaking anonymously characterized it as economic warfare because the scale and precision exceeded anything Canada had ever attempted. Think about that. Canada just proved that Trump's tariff threats were empty bluster that collapsed the moment someone called them. For years, Trump's trade aggression was tolerated because allies feared escalation, because supply chains seemed too integrated to disrupt, and because no one wanted to be first to retaliate. That calculation has just reversed completely. Canada has concluded that American threats lack follow-through, that retaliation carries acceptable costs, that international support is available, and that domestic politics reward strength. And most devastatingly, they've recognized that Trump cannot sustain a prolonged trade war. When allies conclude that standing firm wins while backing down loses, that's when American leverage evaporates. That's when bluffs get called globally. The response issued by Ottawa today was not a negotiating position. It was not an opening offer. It was not a symbolic protest. It was economic warfare. Source after source described the Canadian approach as comprehensive in scope, surgical in targeting, and perhaps most significantly, designed for sustained escalation, but tariff threats only work if targets believe you'll follow through. Canada does not. In fact, their response today was among the most aggressive we've seen from any American ally in decades. Here's what we know. Within 24 hours of Trump's ultimatum, Canada activated 30% tariffs on American agricultural products worth $45 billion annually, 25% duties on manufactured goods from Republican-majority states, restrictions on energy exports that America depends on for heating and transportation. These weren't proportional responses. These were escalation measures, tools that Canada only deploys when they are preparing for prolonged economic conflict. Sources confirmed that Canadian trade officials coordinated with European Union counterparts on synchronized retaliation. Canada acted before Trump could claim victory. They targeted American farmers in Iowa. They targeted American manufacturers in Ohio. They targeted American energy workers in Texas. In other words, Canada targeted Trump's electoral coalition with precision, the voters who delivered his victory. This is what made the retaliation so strategically devastating. Trump's tariff wasn't just economically costly, it was politically suicidal. It represented the kind of miscalculation that could cost elections if sustained. And Canada, understanding that fully, responded strategically, not emotionally, not proportionally, but devastatingly. They didn't match the tariff percentage. They didn't limit the response. They escalated massively. They targeted surgically. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Trade analysts now believe that Trump's tariff ultimatum was designed to test Canadian resolve after years of perceived accommodation. Trump wanted to see whether Ottawa would accept humiliation, whether domestic politics would prevent response, whether economic integration would paralyze retaliation. But instead, the opposite happened. Canada didn't accommodate. They counterattacked with force that was so comprehensive, so targeted, that even Trump supporters noticed. You don't get Trump's attention easily. But Tuesday, Canada did. The psychological impact on Trump personally represents a fundamental challenge to his negotiating mythology. Trump built his entire political brand around being a master dealmaker, around winning every negotiation, and around forcing opponents into submission. Trump's entire approach depends on appearing dominant. Canada's response directly destroys that image. Trump cannot back down because that would confirm the bluff was empty. But Trump also cannot escalate further because American businesses are already screaming. Trump is trapped between admitting defeat and causing more economic damage. That strategic bind, combined with approaching elections and declining approval ratings, creates conditions where desperate decisions become likely. Trade analysts speaking with economic media described Trump's position as strategically cornered, an indication that options have narrowed dramatically. But Canada proved Tuesday that they remain both united and strategic. Their retaliation was not only comprehensive, it was targeted so precisely that Republican senators began calling the White House within hours. That targeting matters because it shows sophistication. It shows that Canada is not reacting defensively. They are playing offense. Successful retaliation creates cascading effects that undermine American trade leverage across multiple dimensions. First, it establishes precedent that American threats can be defeated, encouraging other nations to resist. Second, it signals to European and Asian allies that coordination works, building future coalition potential. Third, it creates conditions where American businesses pressure their own government, fracturing domestic political support. Fourth, it sends unmistakable messages to China and Mexico that American bluffs collapse under pressure, with global implications. And fifth, it inevitably triggers domestic political backlash as farmers and manufacturers demand relief. Now, we need to talk about historical parallels, because understanding how trade wars have ended before illuminates why this moment appears decisive. The most relevant parallel is the Smoot-Hawley Tariff of 1930, when American protectionism triggered global retaliation that devastated the economy. American policymakers witnessed cascading consequences, trading partners retaliating, exports collapsing, and unemployment skyrocketing. Those consequences eventually forced policy reversal, because economic pain became unbearable, because political pressure mounted, and because the strategy obviously failed. That reversal didn't happen through gradual adjustment, but through electoral rejection of the politicians responsible. The result was democratic landslides that reshaped American politics for a generation. Another parallel is the Bush steel tariffs of 2002, when European retaliation targeting swing states forced rapid policy reversal. Bush ordered tariffs, expecting trading partners to accept them. The Europeans retaliated with surgical precision on politically sensitive products. The result wasn't prolonged trade war, but embarrassing retreat when the political cost became clear. Trump is approaching a similar situation where retaliation costs exceed any possible benefit. The visible retreat hasn't occurred yet, but the conditions that precede it are manifestly present and building daily. What makes this moment so critical and so unprecedented is that Canada's retaliation happened while Trump faces multiple political pressures simultaneously. Agricultural constituencies want tariff relief. Manufacturing lobbies want supply chain stability. Republican senators want electoral protection. And business donors want predictable trade policy. Trump is managing these demands while simultaneously facing approval ratings that continue declining. And when leaders in that position face mounting pressure, they don't respond strategically. They respond desperately. They respond erratically. The strategic implications for American trade policy are profound and create both risks and opportunities that economists are carefully monitoring. The risk is that Trump escalates further, triggering additional retaliation that causes recession. That American farmers lose markets permanently to competitors. That supply chains relocate away from American manufacturing. Think about what this means for American workers, and understand why analysts believe this represents the most significant trade policy failure in modern history. The question facing Washington is not whether the tariff strategy failed, which seems evident from every indicator, but whether retreat is possible without admitting defeat. Analysts who characterize this as checkmate understand that current positioning leaves no good options. The danger is clear. Continued escalation causes recession. The opportunity for retreat requires admitting the bluff was empty. White House officials are reportedly planning for scenarios ranging from quiet negotiation to face-saving compromise to doubling down despite consequences. Remember, Trump thought Canada would fold. He thought the threat alone would force concessions. He thought America held all the leverage. But today, American farmers are losing markets. American manufacturers are paying higher costs. And America's closest ally has proven they won't be bullied. Now, Let me bring this full circle to where we started tonight, to that moment at 8:15 a.m. when Prime Minister Carney authorized the largest trade retaliation in Canadian history. What that moment represents is not just a policy response, but the exposure of a fundamental fraud. The moment when Trump's dealmaker mythology collided with reality that cannot be spun away. Think about what it means that America's closest ally just launched economic warfare. Think about what it means that Republican constituencies are bearing the costs. Think about what it means that the bluff failed so completely and so publicly. That's not a negotiating setback. That's strategic collapse where every response option carries political damage and where the trajectory points inevitably toward retreat. And here's the profound truth about bluffs. They work until someone calls them. Then they never work again. Smoot-Hawley seemed powerful until retaliation collapsed American exports. Bush steel tariffs appeared strong until European targeting forced retreat. These policies surprised their architects because the consequences weren't anticipated until they became undeniable. Trump's tariff strategy is experiencing that same collapse. Now we're watching it happen in real time. Tonight, one thing is clear. Trump's tariff bluff has been exposed. Canada's retaliation is devastating American interests, and the checkmate is complete. And tonight, for the first time in his political career, Trump appears to have no winning move. The White House is quiet, too quiet. And when Trump is quiet, it means the situation is worse than even critics imagined. Because tonight, Trump learned something he never believed. Bluffs only work once. Allies can become adversaries. And checkmate means the game is over. This story is far from over. We will be here, watching every detail as the consequences unfold. Thank you for being here. Stay informed, and good night.